Was that, ooh, there we are. I guess I'm on. See, and I was just using my teacher's voice. How many of you, when you traveled abroad, found it really important to try to fit in? Yeah. Did any of you study abroad? Even more so to try to fit in. Well, I'd like to share with you my first study abroad experience. You see, my dad was in the Air Force. And that meant every 3 years we moved. And one of those moves was to Japan. And so my first study abroad experience was called kindergarten. And here I am in the lovely pink kimono, feeling beautiful. But for a lot of children, fitting in isn't, when you travel or move to a new place, isn't as easy as dressing up. For Rosa, she wanted more than anything else, just like any other child, to fit in. She liked pizza, she liked playing sports, she liked hanging out with her friends. She didn't like school as much because it was hard for her. She found reading difficult, and she found writing almost impossible. That's because when Rosa was 10 years old, she suffered an amazing tragedy. She's from Guatemala, and when she was 10 years old, she was on her way to buy eggs for her mother. And Guatemala is one of those countries in the world where women are frequently the victims of violence. She was attacked, raped, and in the process of this violent situation, she fought back. And her aggressor was so angry at this that he took his machete and he cut off her lower arms, slashed at her neck, and left her for dead. Neighbors found her, rushed her to the hospital, and she survived the situation. She spent almost 6 months in the hospital, and thankfully, to a program called Healing the Children, was brought to the United States for prosthetics. And that's where my family came in. At that time, we were working with this organization as a foster family. So we provided a home and transportation to and from the hospital for children who were in the United States for medical care not available to them in their country. And she was here for prosthetics, which was actually easier than the surgeries of cleft lip and palate or clubbed feet and some of the other things that we had, children that had been in our home. And she worked really, really hard. Most importantly, she wanted to fit in. But it was difficult. She had to learn everything. She had to learn how to feed herself. She had to learn how to bathe and dress. Everything required something new. To operate her prosthetics, because there were two, she would have to move one shoulder to open up the other hand. And so one of the therapists said, Rosa, you have to slow down to catch up. She wanted to do everything fast, and she would get frustrated. He said, you have to relearn the task. You have to do it differently than you did it before. And then he talked to me, and he said, I have to slow down. I have to watch her. I have to observe. As she relearns muscle memory, I have to watch what she's doing. I can't make assumptions that what worked for another patient, what worked for someone else is going to work for her. As a language teacher, I had to begin to think about that as well. Because watching Rosa as she learned to do all of those things, and she has, I had to remember that I have to pay attention to. Well, Rosa did learn all of those things, and she was great. She was so excited about what she could do with her hands. She could even learn to tie her shoes. She learned to write with a pencil. She learned to feed herself with a fork. She learned to draw. And after 6 months with us, she was ready to go back to her home. She was so excited to show her family what she was able to do with her new hands. And that's what she called them, my hands. She got back to Guatemala, and we said goodbye to her. 3 months later, a medical team was visiting, and they checked up on her. And we saw them on their return at a function, at a fundraiser. And they shared with us that Rosa's family had decided that the prosthetics would not help her, were not effective picking cotton, and they abandoned her. For us, that was devastating news. Here was this girl who had worked so hard. And so it was an easy decision for our family of 4 to become a family of 5. For Rosa, starting school in the United States was one more place where she wanted to learn how to fit in. So this is a picture of her on her first day of school in the United States. We put her into 5th grade because of her age, but in reality, her challenge was big. She had only had 2 years of formal education in Guatemala, and that was in Spanish. And she wanted to fit in. She did not like being pulled out of her classes to get special assistance. So she worked really, really hard at everything she did. And she was challenged. Obviously, she had to learn the new language. And she was even more challenged because writing was difficult with her prosthetics. And then I felt really guilty when I found out that she needed reading glasses, and I hadn't known. But this girl is tough, one of the most stubborn people I know. And the words came back to me of that physical therapist who said, slow down. You know, occupational therapists are amazing people. They're coaches that help people deal with incredible, not just physical challenges, but the emotional ones that come along with that. And so I had to think about how can I become more like that physical therapist. And I started thinking about in my school setting, that's like a coach. They really do personalize everything they do to those students. What is that student? They slow down to observe. They look at practice. What are they doing? How can they improve? And I started thinking about, how am I going to become more like a coach? I don't know about you, but in my classrooms, if I say, you know, if a student says, well, how five extra miles every day, lose 5 pounds, show up Saturday morning for extra, you know what they do? It's like God says, right? So I have coach envy. I've shared that before. Well, there's a lot of things coaches do, and I thought, well, I need to become more like a coach. I want to learn what those coach strategies are. And so this has been a journey that I've been on now for probably about 4 years. Well, one of those things that coaches do is they know their students. They know their players. And for us, that's one of the things that we can do. And one of the things that we need to start thinking about is, you know, how do we know the students in front of us? Well, there's a new group of students in front of us called Gen Z. Anyone heard of them? Gen Z are students that were born between 2005 and 2012, and they're a really unique group of students. Now, in the past, I used really traditional ways to get to know the students in my classrooms. I would do, you know, look at their past test scores, look at how they performed in a previous year if they were already in language classes. I would do interest surveys and questionnaires, and I could still do those things. I might find out about their learning styles. I would do a lot of just casual questioning. What activities are they involved in? Are they in sports? Are they participating in clubs? But there's more that we can learn. And what I'm learning now about this new generation is really impacting the classroom. For one thing, they're called the 8-second generation. Not because they have an 8-second attention span, but because they have an 8-second filter. In other words, if they haven't decided after 8 seconds that you're interesting or engaging or have information that's useful, they swipe. It's not their phone, it might be their mental, right? And so we have, because they can find that information in another place. You do the same thing. Some of you may all be doing it right now with your phones. Oh, that wasn't interesting. That's what we do. We're looking for the next bit of information. But there's a lot of other pieces about this group that are causing some concern. For one thing, this particular group is highly anxious. This generation is the very first American generation to have been born where there hasn't been war, that there hasn't been terrorism that's unpredictable, that there hasn't been school shootings, that there hasn't been a depressive economy. This is the Hunger Game generation, where it's me against them, and I don't even know where they are or who they are. This is the generation, surprisingly enough, that is the most diverse, and it makes up 25% of our population. This generation is very diverse. They do not, however, believe in the American dream. They believe that, this is the generation where they've heard parents say there is no trust in a 401k. I have to take care of myself. And so they've begun to be called the bubble wrap generation. And they're going to enclose themselves. Now that's provided some good things. For example, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and teenage pregnancy is down 40% among this demographic. But interesting things like postponing driver's licenses is up in a dramatic way. They insulate themselves in other ways. They don't have large groups of friends. They have groups of friends of only 5 to 8. Now these kinds of things impact us in the classroom. Some of you may already be seeing the impact with things like 504 plans or special accommodations for students with anxieties that are now impacting us. And I have them in my own classrooms where maybe a student is having some sort of accommodations or are being suggested because of not being able to speak in front of the class. Well, when you have a class that's performance-based with interpersonal and presentational skills being measured, that becomes a real challenge for us as world language educators. Now, there's some pluses to that, because one of the parts of this generation is that they are very much the Google generation. In fact, Google says that this demographic hits Google more than 5 billion times a day. And they hit YouTube over 4 billion times a day. That means we can flip out things like interpretive tasks because they like to go find research. They like to do that. It also means that we can give them more independent tasks. We can set them on the pathway of finding and seeking. And that we find out is actually part of the new research that's being done on the brain, that they like to find things out. So there's some pieces about this demographic. If I know my students, I can improve and give them new learning tasks. We also find, as from a coach standpoint, that the coach needs to build stamina and endurance. That's part of what drills is all about. Well, our students also need that. They need to be able to do it for the long haul, because language acquisition takes time. And it's frustrating when it's hard, and I feel like I'm not very good at it. And a lot of times, especially those students that are in those middle levels, start to feel like I'm not getting good at it. And if we've paid too much attention to grammar and not enough attention to the big picture and what successes they are making, they might be feeling frustrated. We've heard a lot about lowering or keeping that affective filter low. That's really important for this generation that's already feeling anxious and has those anxieties. In fact, that's the #1 diagnosis right now in this demographic, anxiety. Well, this is again a picture of Rosa. For her, building stamina meant, I want to play sports. I want to do sports. I like to run. I want to be on the cross-country team. I want to be on the relay team. And I have to figure out, step by step, How can I hold a baton and run a relay? I don't have any hands. I can't put it under my arm and keep any forward momentum. So this is what, step by step, taking time to slow down and process the movements, this was the differentiation that we came up with. But believing in her ability to succeed influenced ultimately her motivation. It kept it strong, and this was the solution, and it actually worked. Feeling successful is also a way to improve affective filter. It's not making the task easier, it's making the task possible by slowing it down to keep, and then allowing them to get good at it through practice before we speed it up. You know, the high school quarterback doesn't start playing their freshman year. In fact, they probably start playing earlier, maybe in, in their middle school years, or even in, grade school, or maybe like Jake, this high school senior of mine who graduated with a great scholarship when he was 2. Because anything worth doing well is worth doing poorly at first. And we need to we have to help our students feel motivated through the long haul. We have to help them work on building stamina. And that's one of those things coaches do really well. There's another thing that coaches do well, is they help them understand the power of play, that this is a game and we're going to enjoy it, that it's hard work and it does take practice, but ultimately we're going to enjoy the thrill of the game. Some of the other research that's being done right now on the brain is something called the Triune Brain, or a brain that has 3 parts. One part's called the reptilian part. It's sort of our basic nature to survive, to feed ourselves, to find shelter. The next part is our learning part of our brain, the task part of our brain, and the sort of pleasure part of our brain. And then the third part is that part of our brain where long-term memory is stored. Well, it seems as if the first part, that reptilian part of the brain, is under stress, that none of the rest of the brain opens up. And so for our students, we have to figure out how to relieve that stress. And these are some of the ways that we can do that, by optimizing learning and opening up that brain, that lowering that affective filter. We can do it through a number of ways, which you see here. So we can engage that sinking interest by arousing interest, engaging them in learning. Minimizing negative emotions or fear, we've talked about that. But here's the one I wanted to point out. Heightening positive emotions. Fun, laughter, movement, getting them moving around the classroom, and interaction. This is the piece of my classroom that was missing for a really long time when my students were sitting in rows facing me. They looked at me, and there wasn't any interaction happening. Language is a communicative habit. It's what we do with each other. And the purpose of language is to communicate with another human being. And as soon as you get your students interacting in the language in the classroom, they talk to each other, or to a shoulder partner, to a face partner. As they're practicing the language, acquiring the language, they're also having human connection. And guess what happens? The triune brain begins to operate and allows the learning to go into long-term memory because they're in a sense of community. When you have laughter, did you know that the brain opens up for learning? So the next time in your class and something funny happens, teach something important. The next time you're having a really good movement, see if it, let it go, let it go, let it go, and then teach something critical. The most important part of your lesson has to happen right then because the brain is open for memory. Teach the lesson. Learning a language should meet the same goal, teaching should meet the same goal as learning your first language. It was all about communication. Communication is why we are in the classroom. I heard something this weekend that I thought was really important. And I heard it from Katrina Griffin, our most recent 2017 Teacher of the Year. And she said this: the only place in our schools where interpersonal skills are being measured is in the language classroom. We do that. Another thing that coaches do in the sporting world is that they don't just play home games. So that's something else to really think about, as what can we give to our students? Can we give our students opportunities to play the real game? You see, a test is never really important to students. That doesn't feel real. The only thing that feels real to a student is when they interact with a native speaker. That feels real. That's when they know they can pass the real test. And so how can you provide opportunities for students to do that? How can you provide an opportunity for a student to actually connect, whether it's through Skype, whether it's through the flip grids we saw earlier, whether it's a travel abroad experience, whether it's bringing in a guest speaker, whether it's through some other kind of travel experience. Your students need the opportunity to know that what they're learning in the classroom really works with someone who speaks the language. They never get as excited with you as they will with a native speaker. Coaches, really great coaches, get results that nobody else thought was possible. In the case of my daughter, Rosa, her great result was the President's Physical Fitness Award. I don't know if you remember that from school or have kids that are in school that might be working toward those, but there's all sorts of different tasks that you have to do. The one that she found the most difficult was the arm hang. And she tried it all different ways, with her prosthetics, without the prosthetics, and it wasn't working. And she came home devastated. She wanted that badge so badly. So we went back to what the therapist said. Slow down, take it a step by step, and we started figuring out how she might shift her weight differently to make it happen. And she eventually did achieve it. Slow down to catch up. Coaches stretch skills. And sometimes stretching skills means that you have to differentiate. You have to do something a little bit different. You have to think about problem solving in a new way. Well, when Rosa got to middle school, her school, she loved soccer, but they did not have a girls' team. So we talked to the coach. Is there any way she can play on the team? Can she at least practice with the team? She likes the game. And there wasn't a lot of other sports available to her. Well, her coach said yes. And then we had to differentiate again. Well, she's never been called for handballing. But there were some things that she couldn't do. So, for example, she couldn't do a throw-in. So she played defense, but one of the other boys would come up if she came in behind her to, to throw the ball in if something went out of bounds. But they figured it out. It's the same thing. So we had to observe, what is it that they can do? Where does somebody else need to step in? It's the same thing in our classroom. We need to work with the power. Remember that Gen Z is that small, they like that small group of 5 to 8. How can we work with our students to collaborate so that they can come in and come as a peer and come alongside and help that person when they need that extra piece, when there's something they can't do? And that's part of those interpersonal relationships that students can build to be strong. Coaches celebrate victories, whether it's these students with the State Seal of Biliteracy, or your students after they've successfully had a communication with another peer or with a native speaker. Heart. That's the most important part of what we do. And Rosa's heart is just like these students. It's when you're communicating with those native speakers and you're feeling the success. These students are Rosa's heart. There's the students that today she's helping, just like her own student, like herself. These are students in Indianapolis Public Schools who, like Rosa, are here now doing what she had to learn how to do, how to fit in a new culture and a new environment, because that's what we as world language teachers do each and every day. Thank you.